Hello, this is Mercy Russell again with the Remarkable Relationships Show. I'm here today with my guest, Leslye Kornegay, who I just sort of did a brief introduction to, and now she's with us. I just want to sort of continue to tell you a little bit about Leslye and what we'll be talking about today. As I just briefly mentioned, I met Leslye when we were both students in a doctoral program at the University of Vermont, where she was at the time Director of Custodial Services with 300 employees. And we, over the years, have become not only colleagues, but close friends. So let me just tell you a little bit about Leslye's background. She currently leads the overall housekeeping services, sanitation, and recycling for all academic buildings in a large higher educational, predominantly white institution in the southeast of the United States. Her responsibilities include management oversight for a workforce of 285 union and non-union staff. The department serves the campus community with pride, dignity, and professionalism by providing a clean and sustainable environment. Dr. Kornegay was appointed the Director of University Environmental Services at her current institution on February 14th, 2016. She was formerly with the University of Vermont for 8.5 years as a Director of Custodial Services. Prior to her position at the University of Vermont, Leslye held positions in university facilities organizations where she partnered with senior leadership to place the university internal customer first and implemented accountability measures to ensure that departmental performance met campus expectations. She has led major institutional change initiatives while adhering to her commitment to positive and proactive leadership, transparency in communications, staff development, and strong relationships with internal and external campus stakeholders, customers, and senior leadership. She holds a doctorate of education from the University of Vermont. We both finished that program, by the way. A certificate from the Harvard Executive School of Business, a master's of administration from Central Michigan University, and a bachelor's of science in business administration from the University of Mount Olive. She is a member in the International Honor Society Pi Gamma Mu, IEHA/ISSA, I don't know what that is. Leslye will have to explain that to us, APPA, and a graduate of the HERS Institute, which is a leadership institute for women in higher education. So today I've asked Leslye to come so that we could talk about her journey, personal and spiritual, through the traces of her work life. You will hear about her personal and spiritual growth as she took charge of her own destiny. As Leslye and I talked in preparing for this, it really stood out to me how much her story and her path, her career path, have really been seminal to her many changes that she's made and transformation as she, over the years, on a personal level. So, Leslye, I'd like to say hello.
Hello, Mercy.
Hi. I just thought that perhaps, as we discussed, that we might start with your early years. But before we do that, is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of the way that, I've opened this up and introducing you?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to just comment on the acronyms that you made in the introduction, and that's just the professional associations for facilities in higher education, the major ones, that I'm a member of, or I serve in some capacity in their executive operations.
So I guess, as I was reading your bio, I guess I'm thinking about all the things I've learned about your position and what you do and the particular nature of it. And I think I want to highlight a few things that I know that at the University of Vermont, your staff were, many of them were housekeepers who worked 3 shifts in college classrooms and student dorms. And they also, in the city of Burlington, Vermont, were very much an eclectic group, including many immigrants, because Burlington is a refugee resettlement community. So we had, people from all different countries, backgrounds, races, and quite a few of whom really didn't speak English. And
Yes.
I think, this is adds a complexity in a workforce, and also in promoting, as you often talked about, the development of your staff. It adds a complexity to it, to a job where one might just, might be a department chair, and maybe you're dealing with a lot of faculty and there's some diversity, but the issues are really quite different and really very unique. And plus the number of people, hundreds of them. Now, I know at your current institution, that population profile might be different, but as you emphasized, you have both union and non-union staff, and that just adds a complexity that I just want our audience to appreciate.
Thank you.
So let's just start with your early years. That's I'm a family systems person. And as Leslye and I talked, and I came up with an outline for what to talk about, I think we have probably 3 or 4 hours worth of life to talk about. But so we'll try to just sort of, I think, move through to things that are, interesting both to Leslye and to you, our listeners. So can you just tell us a little bit about where you grew up? Something about your personality and your family as a child. I think that was that's something that you've often talked about, and then your family upbringing.
Sure. So my parents were in the military, in the Air Force, and so I come from a divorced household. My father was in the Air Force and my stepfather was in the Air Force. As you can imagine, the first 13 years of my life were spent, moving every 2 to 3 years to different locations across the United States, and having doing 2 tours with my parents in Tokyo, Japan. And so the tour happened during the height of the civil unrest in our country. Mm-hmm. So when I was raised during a period when segregation was still going on, but in the military was not segregated. And so I've always had the exposure of different cultures and ethnicities and races, in my formative years. Had that exposure and that experience in those relationships. And, that has impacted my skills and development as an adult and how I move in the world. My mother was really ahead of her time. She left my father during a time when women didn't leave men. If you had a good husband, you didn't leave because you wanted something different, especially if you had 3 children. Mm-hmm. But she was very independent and, made the decision that that's what she wanted to do. Yeah, go ahead.
So, but when you came, so you were overseas until you were about 12, is that correct?
Yeah, we came back to the United States when I was 13.
When you were 13, right, with your mom. And when you moved back from that kind of international experience, you moved back to your family's home in North Carolina. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about your mother, about your mother's family, and sort of what your experience was like coming back into the United States at that time?
Sure. So we went from the largest city in the world at that time,
which was Tokyo, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To a city that had 1 stoplight. So you can imagine the cultural shock. Mm-hmm. At that time, I was able to do things like gymnastics and, just really rigorous activities that were in the schools. It was just a different world. And so coming back to North Carolina was a big letdown for all of us. The schools weren't where they should have been. In terms of my interaction at the time with family, we stayed with my grandmother who had a farm, and it was for a short period at that time. But what I will say is, off and on throughout the years, when my parents were divorced, my family lived with my grandmother and all of my cousins, because for some reason, all of my mother's siblings divorced, and the women and had kids. And we all ended up at my grandmother's at the same time. So you can imagine probably about 13 or 14 kids. And, but it was, I remember it being a very positive period. I consider my cousins to be my brothers and sisters as well. And we also, during this time, as I mentioned to you, my experiences haven't been linear, where I've had periods where I've been in very comfortable environments, and then I've had periods when I've been in environments that would be considered as poverty environments. Mm-hmm. So I can remember a time when, my mother, because she was so independent and she was not going to go on welfare, we lived in the projects, So I've had many different experiences. I think the military, being a child of the military, really structured me to where I am very adaptable to any environment. I understand that the same characters in life are going to show up at every location. And it's just a matter of me figuring out who is who.
Right.
And it's been true every time. Mm-hmm. So
when you came back, you had that not uncommon experience of kind of being an outsider, and at age 13, that's a particularly sensitive time, when 13-year-olds are very sensitive to group dynamics and who's fits in and who's different. And we've talked about how that, learning to navigate that experience, is what really was the beginning of your developing skills, because that's a theme you've had throughout your life, including to your current work life today. Now, when you left, so you finished high school you were in North Carolina, near your grandmother's town, which was Dudley, a small town. And from there you went to college, to a historically Black college that's, A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina. So what happened when you went off to college then?
So one of the things I do want to go back to that I have experienced throughout my life is, especially when I came back from overseas, is being bullied. So I was bullied in middle school. I was bullied in high school, and I was bullied in college. And during those times, that kind of behavior wasn't put in check. But one of the reasons why I was bullied was that I was so different. Okay. I didn't assimilate. And I was very independent, and I knew exactly who I was, very mature. And so my college experience was the first time that since I left Japan, that I was actually able to bond with other women. And there were, and still are, about 8 very close friends who, throughout the years, we still stay in contact with each other. College at A&T was an experience like none other. I've never been in an environment where it was all people that looked like me, and they were socially viable in terms of the Greek associations, the culture. I had just never been around that before. And I enjoyed it so much that I didn't stay. I was there for 2 years. And I made the decision that I just I didn't need to stay, because I wasn't, I just wasn't doing well academically.
Academically, yeah.
Yeah.
And
the reason I wasn't doing well is because I wasn't going to class. I was having such a good time. And I had all either half A's or half F's. Okay.
Right.
And talking to someone, I made the decision that, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to fail, because the fear of failure has always been there for me. I just think I need to move on. And so that kind of started my, the adult years. And they really got off to a very, I think, unsettling start, where I just didn't have a really strong foundation. When I left school, I kind of, fluttered a little bit. I worked part-time. I went out of state and lived with family. It was during those times you really needed an education. High school, just coming out of high school, you weren't going to be able to do a lot. And so during this time, I ended up in New Jersey, and I ended up at the Playboy in Atlantic City. And I was recruited to be a bunny, but I was not, I was a tomboy. I wasn't interested in that. And so I became a ballet driver. And I really liked that. That was cool because you got to wear the really cool jogging outfits and the really cool sneakers, and you got to drive everything. So all of us drivers, we got to meet everybody that came into the Playboy, right? And we would drive their vehicles. And when I tell you, in that garage, we would go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in a very short period of time. Okay.
Don't tell your Ferrari owners, please.
During that time, I learned how to drive everything. Mm-hmm. And I had a situation where I got into a vehicle one day, and I don't know how the guy drove up there, but it didn't have no brakes. And I didn't know how to stop it. And so I ran into something to stop it. And, that was my first experience with seeing that people don't really care about you because they weren't concerned that I might have gotten hurt. It was about the vehicle. And I chose not to use the union to support me. And I ended up being transferred out of that position into housekeeping. So that was my first exposure with housekeeping. Mm-hmm. I became a housekeeper. In those days, housekeepers, that was a pretty good living. Mm-hmm. Part of the local 54 union. Our salaries were decent, I remember, and we made exceptional tips from the customers because they were winning, right? So they would leave you chips or whatever. But I made enough income to really support myself well. I remember getting laid off after a couple of years and coming back to North Carolina. And it was during that time that I started working front desk for a major hotel in the area. And I got back in school. So I transferred all my credits from A&T to the major 4-year school there. And was doing very well and decided, okay, well, I'm going to apply for the supervisor.
Leslye, okay, this is, I think, a really important juncture in your story, because this, I think, is where your career really begins to develop and take off. Mm-hmm. We need to take a break. So we're going to take a break and we're going to come back. We'll leave people with a little suspense about what happened as you started, because then, the story gets more, not less exciting in my eyes. This is Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationships Show. My guest today is Dr. Leslye Kornegay. We're going to take a break and we'll be back soon.
All clear, ladies.
Good.
Doing okay?
Yeah, you're great. It's interesting, I just kept thinking that I have no concern about Leslye because you've done so much speaking, and, I know you've, and you wrote a dissertation on your story. So
yeah, but that was the other thing,
Right.
Yeah. I thought they were going to make our dissertations electronic, but they didn't.
You don't have it? Did you post it on academia.edu?
I did not. I thought they were going to do that, the library, because I had someone that wanted to cite my work, and I had to send her my dissertation because the library said it was only on reserve.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know if mine's in the library, but I did post one of the reasons to not do it on academia.edu is that then it's basically published, so if you want to publish it, you have to basically rewrite it, you have to, which you would if anyway. but I think some people want to reserve to publish it, just edit it and publish it as a professional paper. I think that's something I've heard, but I've heard people make really good connections through academia.edu, people finding their papers. So, and I get a certain amount of maybe a view a couple times a month. Somebody, because I know from my research, when I was doing my literature review, there was so little published that a lot of what I found was in dissertations.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
or their literature reviews. So, yeah, I think yours would just make a great book. So, depending on what direction you wanted to go with it,
Yeah, and I'm still figuring that out.
Right.
Because I want the names and places to remain anonymous.
Right. But then also, for advancement in higher ed, having an academic publication always is a big plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you want to do for the last 10 minutes? Do you want to just talk as you're moving, or?
Yeah, I'll continue the story as far as I can, and then you decide whether or not you want to do a part 2.
Well, this is probably close because we took a break earlier.
Yeah, and we got to come back now, unfortunately.
That's fine.
Stand by. Here we go.
Good morning. This is Mercy Russell back with the Remarkable Relationships Show. My guest today is Dr. Leslye Kornegay, and we're talking today about her journey personally, spiritually, through her leadership career path. We were just talking, Leslye, we were talking about your earlier life before, and then just talking about this, I think the first job that you had as you entered the world of environmental services, let's say. So, can we just pick up where you were?
Sure. So I applied for the front desk supervisor position for a major hotel in the area, the major hotel in the area in Raleigh, North Carolina, and was basically told by the general manager that I would not be considered for the position, and was stated that I knew why. And I was flabbergasted. I didn't know what he meant. And he said, well, someone like you will never be a front desk supervisor here. And that was my first experience with this racial discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
He actually steered me to the housekeeping department. And
so just to be clear, he was saying that because of the visibility of the front desk person, they wouldn't have a woman of color in that position.
Exactly.
So it was your race primarily?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And now, mind you, several of the people, my roommate was white. She worked there. She actually ended up getting the job.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, none to say. I didn't have any resentment. I thought about it and I said, well, that was the times.
What year was that? What would you say? That was like
1980, 79, 80.
79, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so I became the assistant director for the housekeeping department. No experience, mind you, other than having been a housekeeper. And I did that for a couple of years, and I was still in school. And I made the decision to, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to be the best at it. Right? I'm going to take it as far as I can take it. And so I went from an assistant within 5 years, director, to an executive for at least 3 major hotels in the area, and I helped to open 2 of them. So I did all work with the general manager and did all the planning and stuff to open the hotel. I was doing extremely well. I was doing so well that I decided to stop going to school. Okay. And it was at the last position that the general manager that had hired me, and he was probably the epitome of what a leader should be. He ended up going back to California, and they hired another person who I ended up going through a sexual harassment experience. And when that happened, I walked off the job. At those times, I didn't know, that it didn't dawn on me like go see EEO, or there was no diversity offices in the departments, that kind of stuff. The options weren't there. And it was his word against mine. And by my walking off the job, it was like the worst time to do it. Like we were in a recession. The fact that I walked off the job, I couldn't use that job to apply for other jobs. People wanted to know, well, what have you been doing the last 2 years? Right? Mm-hmm. So I was unemployed for a year without any unemployment. And when you talk about going from what I considered the top down to rock bottom with nothing, when you can't pay your bills, and you don't have nowhere to go. Okay. I made the decision then, and it was, you're talking about the spirituality. This is one of those times where that came into play. I remember being in church on New Year's Eve and making the decision then, God, if you bring me out of this, then this won't ever happen again. I never blame that on God, because God doesn't, that's not how my God works. Okay. And so I ended up getting, after a year, a position with another major hotel. I was connected with the general manager, and he hired me just based on a conversation. And I was also 6 months later hired at another major school in Chapel Hill. And I worked both of those jobs for a year. Okay. One was on third shift and the other one was on first shift, because I was determined that I would never. And I also made the decision to get back in school. So from there, I've worked at the largest school system in the area for several years, working with principals and the head custodians, who are probably some of the hardest workers in America, because they take care of the whole school. So it's one person doing everything, to going on to being hired as an administrator a little bit later on. Because once I started with the school in Chapel Hill, I was actually working for the state of North Carolina. And so every move I made from there was internal within the state of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And the last position that I had in North Carolina was for the major school in Raleigh and major university. Mm-hmm. As deputy director, but I started there as a administrator, and was hired again based on my, by chance meeting the assistant director at a conference and my talking my way into a position with him.
Mhm.
Um,
So part of what you're talking about is the fact that once you made up your mind,
mhm.
you sort of, went along, tried things, kind of went your own way. And then when that fell apart, but eventually you made up your mind, you were going to find a way to make it work. And when you made up your mind, you did whatever it took. So you pursued contacts that you needed you didn't just sit back and wait for people to recognize you. You approached people and you had a way of talking to them so that it would open a door and that they would help you.
Well, it was gone. And I felt like I'd already been at the bottom. The most you can do is reject me.
Right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so, and I'm the same way to this day, is that, I don't care who you are. I'm going to be, personable and approachable. And I think that has helped serve me well.
So,
but
Leslye, I'm thinking about our time, and I want there's so much more to talk about, but can you just briefly summarize what your career has been like since then? Because you went on to complete a bachelor's.
I completed the bachelor's, and I realized once I had done that, that I was already at that level. I was already had a career, and I decided to go ahead and get the master's, completed the master's, and decided that, okay, why am I not moving like everybody else? And I thought it was because, okay, well, you're in a predominantly white institution, and maybe it's because you're Black. So I started looking outside of North Carolina, because I figured, okay, well, in order for me to grow, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, that's
right?
your theme, right? I have to go to grow. I have to go to grow. Yeah.
So I started applying, and I probably, and this is no exaggeration, went on 25 to 30 out of state, fully paid search interviews, some as a finalist. And I always got the same answer. You are great, you're wonderful, blah, 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 but you're not quite what we're looking for. You're not the right fit. And that basically told me that they weren't ready to hire a Black person in leadership, especially a Black female. But what I learned when I went because I was hired in Massachusetts to be over facilities organization. And it was a VP who took a chance on me. He was white. And I think the difference with Michael was that he was also gay. And so he understood what I wanted to do and the challenges that I might have been having to do it. And he hired me. And that began my trajectory into into leadership.
Senior leadership, yeah.
From there, I went to the University of Vermont as the Director of Custodial Services. And I did not want to necessarily become a Director of Housekeeping. But after completing my master's, I got into a doctoral program with a nameless school that I'll let it remain anonymous. I fulfilled all of the doctoral requirements But when it came time to get support to do my research, that didn't happen. And so I have always had to fund my education, with the exception of when I went to A&T, my parents paid. And so I had accumulated a huge, amount of debt, sending myself to school. And I made the decision to go to UVM purely on the fact that I could get a doctorate there and I wouldn't have to pay for it. And
Right,
that's
it was
exactly,
part of the benefit, the employee benefit was that you could get a degree and be in a degree program
right,
covered by the university.
right. And so what I hadn't planned to be at UVM more than 5 years, but I ended up being there for almost 10. And I left the job in a very good situation. But I also realized sometimes when things are going well, that's the time to go. I had in my journey lost the most important person in my life, my mother, to pancreatic cancer. And that started another soul searching spiritual journey for me, where when I lost my mother, you don't understand what that's like until you go through it. And I made the decision then that I probably needed to start making my journey back south. I just felt like I needed to be closer to my family. And so that's where I am today. I am not finished. I really didn't start my career well until I was 38 years old. And so I've done all of this since I was 38. And I think I've covered most of it, Mercy, but there's so much more.
Of course there is.
It has not been the most positive experience. And one of the things that my mother told me a long time ago was she really appreciated and respected me because I don't give up. And I've been challenged in these organizations, accused of a lot of things by people that I guess the right word would be sabotage.
Right.
Because I was a person of color, I was a female, and they didn't want me there.
Right. I had the opportunity or the privilege of hearing a lot of the gory details of, one of these instances when you were in Vermont. And, I think as you mentioned to me when we were speaking, in the last several weeks, that, you're in a different institution in a different part of the country, different dynamics. But you said something I thought was really interesting and wise. You said these political challenges, once you're in leadership, come with the job. That it wasn't a matter of just getting it right or getting in the right institution or being the right leader. This was just these were going to be predictable dynamics. And I guess my thought is that then they would also perhaps be intensified and sometimes ignited by the fact that you are a Black female. So both being Black and being female in leadership in academic institutions, for all the talk about diversity and openness, that those characteristics are laid on just what I would call the normal challenges in leadership, because I've seen white females deal with, and actually my white male father-in-law deal with, similar dynamics, but the intensity and the persistence has been really, just become sort of a, what do we call it? What are an iron, you having an iron in the fire for you. But I also, from what I know of you, have seen how the skills that you've developed and the maturity and the spiritual maturity that you've developed along the way. Like what was the other quote you said to me the other day? Just because you are the boss doesn't mean you are anything.
Well, doesn't mean that you have any authority.
Right.
If you go into leadership to have power, then you're in the wrong job. Right.
Right. But really, it's the personal power that you've gained, right? The sort of stamina, the persistence that, as your mother said, and you had that characteristic from a young age. And you may not have seen how it would serve you or how it would, develop over time, but that is what, has really helped you to adapt to all these different circumstances. So I'm also wondering if you could just speak a little bit more. We have a few minutes left. And I believe, yeah, I think we have to wrap up now. So I'm looking at my clock, but so at any rate, I just want, I guess there's more to the story, of course, and I hope to have you back so we can really sort of dive in to, just sort of the inner meat. You and I had a chance to talk about your, travels through your spirituality, your, church connections, your COVID experience. And I hope we get to talk about that again. So what I would like to say is that this is Mercy Russell with the Remarkable Relationship Show. My guest today has been Dr. Leslye Kornegay. Now, if you would like to contact Dr. Kornegay, you can reach her at Kornegay, LKORNEGAY @me.com. Her email will also be.
There's no Y.
There's no.
Yeah.
It's just KORNEGA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So, but it will, that will also be in the show notes as will her bio. I want to thank you again, Leslye, for joining us today. And this is, I think we have a remarkable relationship, but, the way you've navigated and adapted to so many different types of relationships in your work life. I mean, we haven't even touched upon it. And I really thank you so much for joining me today and beginning your story of leadership with us.